So lesson 2, we have to be careful not to identify or define people with autism by their behavior. Well, you know, she's a runner. He's a stripper. Not professionally, but he's a stripper. Okay? He's a biter. And then we become severely emotionally handicapped teachers. Okay? We define people by their labels. We are educators. These are children. And parents, I think it's a real gift that you can give to educators if you can help us define your children by who they are. Don't use the label. I remember there's a parent in Indiana who has just been such a blessing to know, and one of the things that she does at the beginning of every school year is that she writes a letter to her son's teacher and talking about her son and mentions nothing about his autism, mentions nothing about anything related to his autism, but talks about what a wonderful young man he is and his fascinations and the relationship he has with his siblings. And it's helped people to see him in a different light. And I think that we have to quit defining people by their behaviors, by their labels. Because then what we do is that we build stereotypes that hinder opportunities, that hinder potential, that hinder expectations. Instead, what we have to be able to do is that we have to see individuals for the wonderful gifts that they give us. So I have to tell you that the reason that I get called into schools, I spend a lot of time in schools, is often because of challenging behaviors. And I apologize. I know those of you who have heard me speak before have heard this story, but it still is my very favorite one. In Indiana, I had a teacher who called me who said, "We have a child who is biting teacher's breast. What do we do?" And by the way, for those of you who've never been to Indiana, that's not an acceptable behavior in Indiana. Raise your hand if you're from Louisiana. In Louisiana it is, during Mardi Gras. Right? Isn't that how you get beads? Right, Vicki? I've got a case of them. And so, because I'm an academic, I thought about it for a while, and I said, when a child is biting teacher's breast, do not pull away quickly. Isn't that good guidance? Well, it could hurt. And so I've come to realize a few things about it, and one of the things that is always a danger for any of us professionals who are here is that parents will come up to us and say, we have a child who does this behavior, what do we do? And first of all, you need to know that there is not going to be a recipe that says, child has this label, does this behavior, shake twice, the behavior will go away. Okay? We have to dig much deeper. But the other thing that I've come to realize is that when people ask me that question, what they're often looking for is a crisis management response. And what I have also learned about crisis management is that while it may be a piece of the plan, when you have somebody who is hurting themselves, hurting other people, doing property destruction, it may be a piece of the plan, but if that's where you stop, you will remain in crisis. It should never be the entire plan or the entire focus. And while safety should always be a first consideration, it should never be the only consideration. And too often what I see is that people have an individual who has some challenging behaviors, they suppress it through some means, and then walk away and feel like their job is done. Their job has only just begun. Okay? So be very careful, because one of the things that I've learned is that crisis management may actually strengthen a behavior. It may actually heighten the behavior. And for example, I have learned, children have taught me, that some children would rather go home. Do you all know that? If the punishment is, we're going to send you home, some kids want that. And then they figure out, if I act out, I get to go home. Okay? I keep trying to do that with my boss. It isn't working. Okay? So be careful about that. I think the other lesson that I've learned is that when we talk about behavior, too often people want to focus on punishment. We talk about behavior support plans and proactive planning. But there's always, but what about punishment? How do we punish people? And you need to understand that the only definition of punishment is that it decreases behavior. So some people's punishment may be other people's reinforcers. The other thing that we have to be careful about is that when we get into punishment mode, or when we get into using staff to be the behavioral source of control for individuals, then what we've developed are adult-controlled procedures. And what we really need to focus on are self-control procedures. Now, I have worked with, my friend Susan Marino knows that as a teacher, I have worked with some pretty tough kids. One of my students that I worked with was a large man, about 5'8". He weighed about 350 to 400 pounds on any given day, and he had beautiful blue eyes and an engaging smile. And he was a stripper, but again, not professionally. But he was good at it. I mean, aren't you ever amazed by these behaviors, how good they are? And he was identified as having a 0 IQ, which I don't understand how you can do, because it seems like if you show up for the test, you should get some points. And you're breathing, you should get even more, okay? He taught me so much about autism. He was basically nonverbal. And I want you to hold on to the concept that he had a 0 IQ. And so when I met him and when I entered that classroom, I walked into that classroom and I had all these restraints and helmets and arm restraints. Came to find out that he would hit himself in the head about 118, 120 times a week, really hard, so that they were concerned about him losing his vision. And so what he had was that he had arm restraints and a helmet that we had to put on him when he would start to hit himself. And he was a big guy. And so we'd have to put these arm restraints on. And so after a while, I started, kind of watching him. And there were a few things that he taught me by watching his behavior. One of the things that I noticed is that once he had the arm restraints on, he would hum. He was really happy. The other thing that he would do is that when he was really thrilled with something, he'd walk around and he'd get a little kick in his foot, a happy little kick. And he'd go like this, okay? And he'd hum. And so one morning he walked into the room and I went up to him and pushed on his chest and I said, "It is so great to see you this morning." And he got a little kick. And so I came to realize that he loved that deep pressure. Over time, we taught him how to access his restraints on his own. And we built in deep pressure into his program. And we were able to get his self-injurious behaviors down to about 11 a week with real mild hits. Okay? That was a team of us that did that. We never do this in isolation and with the family. And I actually got to see him recently. One of the things that he would do when I was his teacher is that he became very possessive of me. So if I was sitting with somebody else, he would come and pick me up, basically, and move me in the chair next to him. Okay? And I'm movable sometimes. And I went to see him in he lives in a house with one other gentleman and they get along fine, It's somebody that they didn't just plop somebody into the home, but they figured out somebody who, it was a relationship that could be established. And so he's sitting in his living room, and I'm sitting at the table talking to his staff, and he came over and picked me up and put me on the couch next to him. That was 25 years later. Don't tell me that he has a 0 IQ. So one of the lessons that I didn't put in here is don't let IQ define people. Okay? Be very careful. And the other recommendation that I would give you is don't ever confuse lack of language with lack of understanding.